They struck her in the courtyard, and she did not make a sound. The cane came down across the back of her shoulders, then again, and the steward of the southern hold spat into the snow at her feet. Wren did not lift her hand to shield herself. She did not turn her face away. She stood with her bound wrists in front of her and her chin level with the iron gates, and she counted in silence. 1, 2, 3. The way she had counted every winter of her 22 years. The pack had assembled in the cold to watch the Alpha King receive his quarterly tribute from the outer holds. Furs, grain, a girl when a girl could be spared. This year the southern hold had sent Wren. She was not the prettiest the steward could have chosen. She was not the gentlest. But she was the one who had refused to lower her eyes when he ordered it, and so she was the one being delivered to the Iron Throne with bruises blooming under her collarbone as a warning to the others. A horn sounded from the inner gate. The crowd stilled. He came out alone. No guards, no retinue, no crown. Just a tall man in a black wool coat with a wolf's pelt across one shoulder and eyes the color of riverbed stone. And Wren had been told all her life that the Alpha King of the Iron Reach was monstrous, and she had expected a beast. She had not expected exhaustion. Halvar was 28 years old. He had inherited a kingdom 3 years before, on the night his father coughed blood into a basin and named him heir between rattling breaths, and he had not slept a full night since. The pack saw a king. He saw, every morning, a man who could not remember the last time he had wanted anything for himself. His eyes moved across the line of offerings, settled on her. She is 22 years old, he thought, and was startled by the precision of the knowledge, as though it had been spoken into his ear by someone standing very close. He did not yet understand that something had begun. He stepped down from the dais. The southern steward bowed so deeply his forehead nearly touched the snow. Your Grace, the hold sends. That one. Halvar's voice was quiet. Why is she bleeding? A small matter of discipline, Your Grace. She forgets her place. Untie her. Untie her, or I will, and I will use your teeth to do it. The steward's hands shook on the rope. Wren did not move. She watched the king the way one watched a winter sky, without trust, but without flinching either. When her wrists came free, she did not rub them. She let her arms fall to her sides as if they had always been free. He smells like cedar and iron, she thought, and he looks like he hasn't eaten in a week. Halvar's head snapped up. For one impossible heartbeat he was certain that he had heard her speak. But her mouth had not moved. Her eyes were on the snow. She had said nothing aloud. His wolf rose at the back of his throat with a low, careful interest, like an animal that had just noticed a new sound in the forest and did not yet know whether it was prey or thunder. He turned to his beater. She rides in the carriage, not the wagon. Roderick, broad and red-bearded and unflappable, only nodded. It was the High Steward, Droven, who stepped forward from beneath the colonnade, his pale hands folded over the silver chain of his office. Your Grace, the offering must be processed through customary channels. The hold steward has not yet. The hold steward beat a woman bloody in my courtyard before I had taken my first breath of the morning. Halvar did not look at Droven. Tell me again about customary channels. Droven's smile did not reach his eyes. Of course, Your Grace. The king turned and walked back inside his fortress, and behind him, Wren followed at the careful distance of a woman who had spent her life learning exactly how close she was permitted to stand to power. She did not know that she had just spoken inside the king's head. She would not know for some time. The fortress was older than the kingdom. Stone walls black with 300 years of hearth smoke, corridors that twisted like the inside of a shell, and, at the heart of it all, a great hall with a fire pit sunk into the floor and a carved wolf throne behind it. The throne was older than the walls. The wolf carved into its back had eyes of polished iron. Wren was brought to a small chamber 2 floors above the hall, a bed, a wash basin, a window that looked out over the inner courtyard, a locked door at the far end of the corridor, heavy, banded with iron, dust thick on the handle. No one used that hallway. No one explained the door. The healer who washed her shoulders was old and silver-haired and called herself Linnea. She did not speak unnecessarily. When Wren flinched at a particularly cold cloth, Linnea murmured, "Easy, child," and that was the only kindness she offered, and somehow it was enough. I want to ask her about the door, Wren thought, watching the corridor through the chamber's open arch. But she would only tell me not to ask. 3 floors below, in the great hall, Halvar gripped the edge of the council table hard enough that the wood creaked. She would only tell me not to ask. Wren's voice, inside his skull, as clear as if she was standing behind him. He turned. The hall was empty except for Roderick, who looked up from a map with a frown. "Your Grace?" Halvar said nothing. He did not know what to say. He thought very carefully. "Hello." The thought went out and nothing came back. He waited. Nothing. He sat down at the table and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes until red flared behind them. 3 floors above, Wren was thinking about whether the locked door at the end of the hall hid a body, a treasury, or a wife. Halvar heard every word. By nightfall he had 3 working theories and rejected all of them. The first, he was finally losing his mind. His father had warned him this would happen. The Iron Throne broke kings. The crown drove them mad by their 5th winter. Halvar had 3 winters in him, and a 4th coming. Maybe early. The second, she was a witch. Some southern hedgecraft, planted in his court to destabilize him. Drovan would say so. Drovan would say so within the hour, in fact, if Halvar told him. So Halvar did not tell him. The third, and this one he could not yet name, was that something had been waiting for her arrival. That whatever it was had been latent in him for years, dormant under the crown, and the moment her eyes had met his in the courtyard, it had woken. He sat in his private study with the fire burning low and listened. She was tired. She was thinking about a sister she had left behind in the southern hold, a younger one, 12, called Bryn. She was thinking that the bruises on her shoulders did not hurt as much as the worry. She was thinking that the king's eyes were not what she had been promised. He looked at me like he was the one being given to me, she thought. That is not how this is supposed to work. Halvar's chest cracked open at that. He did not move. He sat very still in his chair and let the fire burn down to embers, and he did not understand what was happening to him, but he understood, with the precision of a man who had spent 3 years governing without ever once being known, that he had just been seen. Not flattered, not feared, not wanted for his crown. Seen. By a woman who did not know he was listening. He pressed his palm against his mouth and stared into the dying fire. And his wolf, which had been silent for so long he had forgotten what it sounded like to be accompanied inside his own skin, let out a low, soft sound that was almost a sigh. The next morning the curiosity gap widened. A serving boy was found in the lower armory with his throat cut. The boy was 12. He worked the morning rounds, carrying bread and tea to the watch. He had no enemies because he had no time to make any. Halvar stood over the body with Roderick and the captain of the watch and the high steward, and the 4 of them looked down at a child who had bled out, alone in the dark. A burglary gone wrong, Drovan murmured. Tragic. The armory should have been better guarded. Halvar did not answer. He was listening. 3 floors above, Wren had just heard the commotion in the corridor, and she was thinking, too convenient. They wouldn't kill a boy for armory scraps. They killed him for what he saw. Halvar's eyes moved to Drovan. What was he carrying? Tea, Your Grace, I imagine. Tea to whom? A flicker. A hesitation so small it could be missed. I would have to consult the duty roster. Consult it. Halvar walked out of the armory and up the spiral stair to the chamber where the Southern Hold's offering had spent her first night in his house. And when he reached her door, he stopped, and he did not knock, because he could hear her thinking on the other side of it, and he did not yet have the language to explain to her what he was. He stood at the door for a long moment. Then he turned and walked away. Lady Mirella arrived 3 days later. She was the daughter of the Northern Hold's Alpha, a noble girl, 25, who had been raised on the assumption that she would one day be Luna of the Iron Reach. She arrived with 2 carriages and 4 ladies-in-waiting, and a smile that did not move when she saw Wren standing on the steps in a borrowed dress with the bruises still yellowing on her collarbone. Your Grace? Mirella's curtsy to Halvar was perfect. And this must be the Southern offering. How quaint. She extended a gloved hand to Wren, as though to a servant. Wren did not take it. She inclined her head, polite, exact, and said, My lady. Halvar, standing 6 paces away, heard inside his skull, She is going to try to kill me by the end of the week. She has not decided how yet. He nearly laughed. He had not laughed in 9 months. He did not laugh. He bowed slightly to Lady Mirella and said, You will dine with us tonight, my lady. The hall at 7. Mirella smiled. Drovan, watching from the colonnade, did not. The poisoning came on the 4th night. It was elegant work, a paste smeared on the rim of Wren's cup, faint enough that a healer would have called it dyspepsia, and a less paranoid kingdom would have buried her by morning. Wren did not drink. She lifted the cup, paused, and set it down without tasting. Across the hall, Halvar had been listening to her thoughts for an hour, a steady, dry current that had become the most welcome sound he knew. And he heard her register the wrongness before her hand had even lowered. Bitter. Almonds. That's not wine. He was on his feet before she had spoken aloud. Out! His voice rolled through the hall like a struck bell. All of you, out! Now! 40 wolves rose from the tables. Lady Mirella did not move quickly enough. Roderick caught her elbow and steered her toward the door with the unhurried efficiency of a man who would not be questioned. Drovan rose more slowly, and his pale eyes met Halvar's across the emptying room, and for the first time Halvar felt the old man assessing him, not as a king, but as an obstacle. When the hall was empty, Halvar crossed to Wren. He did not touch her. He stopped 3 paces away. Did you drink it? No. How did you know? It smelled wrong. You smelled bitter almonds and you stopped before raising it to your mouth. Yes. He held her gaze. Most people would have drunk it anyway. Most people in your position. A girl from the outer holds, at a king's table, watched. Most people would have drunk it to avoid offense. I am not most people. No. His voice softened. You are not. He turned and threw the cup into the fire pit, and the flames flared green for a long moment, and Wren watched the green light play on his face and thought, very clearly, You are afraid for me, and you have not known me a week. Halvar's shoulders went rigid. He did not turn around. He stood with his back to her and watched the green fade out of the fire, and he did not trust himself to speak, because he was, for the first time in 3 years of governance, on the verge of weeping in his own great hall in front of a woman he had not yet asked a single direct question. He left the hall without looking at her. She stood alone in the firelight and watched him go, and she did not understand why a king had nearly broken in front of her over a cup of poisoned wine. And she filed the moment away the way she filed every strange thing, to be opened later, in the dark, when she had time to be afraid. He sent for her in the morning, not formally, no herald, just a quiet note in the hand of a man who clearly did not delegate his correspondence. The East Library, if it suits you. There is tea. H. Wren went. The East Library was a long, narrow room with arched windows that looked out over the frozen orchard, and a fire that had been laid by someone who understood fires, and 2 chairs pulled close enough that 2 people could speak without raising their voices. Halvar was already there, in a plain wool shirt with the sleeves pushed back, and there was, as promised, tea. He stood when she entered. He did not say anything. She sat. He poured. She watched him pour, and she said, "You do not have a steward to do that for you?" "I have a steward. I have several stewards. I do not always wish to be served." "That is not what kings say in the south." "It may be why I do not visit the south." A silence. He set the cup in front of her. "I owe you an apology, Wren of the Southern Hold." His eyes did not leave the fire. "I should have asked your name in the courtyard. I should have asked it on the first night. I have not asked it for 6 days, because every time I open my mouth to ask, I am already inside your head, and the question feels like a courtesy I have not earned. You did not choose to be inside my head. No, but I have stayed. You did not choose that either." He looked at her then. "I could have left the chamber. I could have stopped listening. I did not. I sat in that chair for 6 nights, and I listened to you grieve your sister, and I did not stop. So no, I did not choose the binding, but I chose what I did with it." She wrapped both hands around the cup. "What did you do with it?" "I learned the shape of you." He was quiet. "I learned that you count when you are afraid. I learned that you worry about your sister in a way I have not worried about anyone in 3 years, because I have not let myself. I learned that you noticed the bruise on Linnea's wrist the second day and did not say anything because Linnea did not want it noticed. I learned that you are kinder than your face. I learned that you are more dangerous than my court. I learned, last night, that you do not believe a king has ever been afraid for anyone." She set the cup down. Her hand was not entirely steady. "And what will you do with all of that?" "Nothing without your leave." "You cannot stop listening." "No, but I can leave the chair empty at night. I can spend my evenings in the lower hall where the noise of the watch will drown you out. I can give you privacy in the only way that is left to me. You only have to ask." She looked at him for a long time. She said, "Don't." "Don't what?" "Don't leave the chair empty. Not yet. You have heard 6 days of me. I have heard 6 days of nothing. It is not fair, and I am asking you to make it fair." "How?" "Tell me one thing back, every day. One thing you would not have told me if I had not been forced inside the listening of you." Halvar set down his own cup. He thought about it for a long moment. Then he said, "My father did not name me his heir willingly. He had 3 sons. I was the 3rd. The other 2 were better loved, better trained, better suited. They died in the same winter, of fever. I was 25, and I had been raised as a spare, and my father coughed blood into a basin on a Tuesday night and told me I would be king by Thursday, and I have not slept a full night since." A pause. "That is one thing." "Yes." "Tomorrow you will tell me another." "Yes." She picked up her cup again. She said, very quietly, "Thank you, Your Grace." "Halvar." "Halvar." He closed his eyes briefly when she said it. Inside his head she thought, and she did not yet know she was thinking it loud enough for him to hear, "He looks 20 years younger when someone uses his name." He did not answer. He only refilled her cup, and they sat in the library with the fire and the tea, and the long view over the frozen orchard for another full hour, and neither of them spoke aloud, and neither of them needed to. The locked door at the end of her corridor was opened on the 6th night, and not by her. She heard it from her chamber, the long groan of unused hinges, the scrape of iron on stone, and she rose from her bed and walked to her doorway and looked down the hall. A figure in a grey cloak, a lit candle, the high steward, Droven, slipping inside the chamber that had not been entered in 4 years. He closed the door behind him. Wren stood in her doorway with her hand against the wall and thought, "That door belongs to someone. That door has a name. He is in it without permission." She thought it loudly enough that 2 corridors away, in the king's private study, Halvar set down his quill and stood up so fast his chair fell. He found her in the corridor, in her night shift, with a candle of her own. She did not seem surprised to see him. "Your Grace, how long have you been standing there?" "Long enough to know the steward went into a room he should not be in." Halvar looked at her clear grey eyes in the candlelight, at the steadiness of her hand around the brass holder, at the bruises which had nearly faded, and he said, "I need to tell you something." "Yes?" "You will not believe it." "Try me." He told her. He told her in the corridor in the dark, in a voice so low she had to lean in to hear it, that on the morning of her arrival a binding had snapped into place between them, and he had been hearing her thoughts ever since. And he had not known how to say it, because he was certain she would think him mad, and he was certain she would think herself violated. And he had spent 6 nights listening to her grieve her sister and inventory her bruises and notice everything in his court that he himself was too tired to see. She listened with her hand flat against the wall. When he was done, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Prove it." He almost smiled. "How?" "Think something. Something only I would know. About me." He closed his eyes. "Your sister Bryn keeps a wooden hare your mother carved. She sleeps with it under her pillow. You took it out of your pack the first night, so she would have it when she woke and found you gone." Wren's face did not change for a long moment. Then her eyes filled. "That is in my head," she whispered. "That is only in my head." "I know." "How long?" "Since the courtyard. Every thought, yes." She stepped back from him then, 1 step, no more, and pressed her free hand against her throat as though she could feel where the words came out. "Get out of me." "I cannot." "Get out." "Wren, I cannot. I have tried. For 6 nights I have tried." He had used her name. He had not used it before, and he had not meant to, and it landed between them in the corridor like a thrown coin. She looked at him. He looked at her, and inside his head, very quietly, she thought, "You said my name like it cost you." He said, "It did." She closed her eyes. "What is behind the door?" she said. "I do not know." "You are the king of this house, and you do not know what is behind a door in your own corridor. That door has been locked since the night I was crowned." His voice was very tired. "I was told it held my father's papers. I was told to leave them sealed. I was told a great many things in the week after my father died. And I was 25. And I believed the man who told me." "Droven?" "Yes." A long silence. She opened her eyes. "Then we should find out what is in the room he is willing to enter at midnight without permission." "Yes." "Tonight." "Tonight." She blew out her candle and followed her king down the corridor, and inside his head she was no longer thinking, "Get out of me." She was thinking, and she did not yet know he could hear it, and he did not have the courage to remind her, "I am not as afraid as I should be." He did not answer. He only closed his hand briefly over the iron handle of her chamber door as they passed it, the way a man closes his hand over a railing in the dark. For balance. For proof. For the small relief of having something solid to hold. If you are still listening, and I hope you are, would you do me one small kindness and tap the like for this story? It tells the algorithm to find more wolves like this one, and it lets me keep telling them. The chamber Drovan had entered was empty by the time they reached it. It had not been empty long. A candle still smoked on the desk. 3 drawers stood open. A ledger lay on the floor, splayed, its pages turned to a column of names. Halvar lifted it. Wren read over his arm. The names were lunar candidates. 30 years of them. Beside each name, a date. And beside each date, a single word in the same careful hand. Dismissed. Dismissed. Departed. 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 Beside one name, Halvar's mother, the word was buried. Beside 3 others, women Halvar did not recognize, the word was the same. Beside the most recent name, written in fresh ink, Wren of the Southern Hold. No word yet. A blank space. Waiting. Wren's hand closed on the edge of the desk. "He has been doing this," she said quietly, "since before you were born." "Yes." "He chose the women who came to your father. He chose the ones who came to you. He kept the ones who were pliable. He removed the ones who were not." "Yes." "And the binding." Her gray eyes lifted to his. "The thing in our heads, he did that." Halvar was silent. She said, "He did not do that to you for love. He did it so he could hear what they were thinking, through you. Every Luna candidate, for 3 generations." "I am the listening post," Halvar said softly. "I have been the listening post. I did not know." She put down the ledger. She said, "Then we have a problem larger than a poisoned cup." And in the corridor behind them, somewhere very close, a floorboard creaked. The next morning, Roderick was found at the foot of the watchtower stair with his neck broken. It was made to look like a fall. It did not look like a fall. The beater of the Iron Reach did not fall down stairs he had climbed for 15 years. Halvar stood over the body with his hand pressed flat against the stone of the wall, and inside his head, Wren was crying without sound, 2 corridors away, because she had liked Roderick, and because she understood what his death meant. Drovan arrived with the morning council. His face was arranged in proper sorrow. "A terrible accident, Your Grace." Halvar did not look at him. He said, "Send word to the northern holds. The beater's body will lie in state for 3 days. I will receive condolences in the hall." "Of course, Your Grace." "And summon Lady Mirella." A small flicker. "Your Grace, is that prudent in this time of—" "Summon her." Drovan bowed. When Mirella came, Halvar received her in the great hall in front of 40 witnesses, and he did the thing the script demands of a burdened king, the thing his court was certain a king of his weight could not afford to do. And he stepped down from his throne, and walked the length of the hall, and stopped 3 paces from her, and he said, "My lady, you have been guest in this house 6 days. In those 6 days a serving boy has been killed, a guest at my table has been poisoned, and my beta has been thrown down a stair. You will be in the southern carriage by sundown. You will not return to the Iron Reach in my lifetime. Your father will be informed by morning." The hall did not breathe. Mirella's smile, for once, faltered. "Your Grace, I have done nothing." "I did not say you had done it. I said you would leave." He turned from her. He walked the length of the hall the other way, and he did not stop at the dais. He stopped at the back of the hall, where Wren had been standing very still against the column for the entire exchange in a plain wool dress and her hair pinned simply, and he stopped 3 paces from her, and he said, in a voice the hall could hear, "You are my guest in this house, not my offering, not my tribute, my guest, by my own choosing. And anyone in this hall who treats you as less will answer to me before the moon turns." The hall did not breathe. Wren did not move. Inside his head she thought, very softly, "You did not have to do that." He thought back, I did. I should have done it the first day. A wolf at the back of the hall, an old wolf, grey-muzzled, barked once. It was the closest thing to applause the iron reach permitted. Then another. Then a dozen. By the time Halvar reached the doorway, the hall was alive with it, and Drovan stood beside his empty throne with his hands folded over his silver chain, and his pale eyes did not blink. That evening, for the first time in 6 days, Wren slept without flinching at the sounds in the corridor. That evening, Halvar did not sleep at all. He stood at the window of his private study and watched the snow fall over the inner courtyard, and he listened to her breathing through the binding, the way another man might watch a candle burn down. And he thought, not loudly enough for her to hear, because he had learned to think quietly now, in a way he had never learned before. I will burn this kingdom to the ground before I let him touch her. It was the most honest thought he had had in 3 years. The reversal came on the 9th night. Wren cut her hand on a knife in the kitchen, a small cut. She had been peeling an apple for old Linnea, who was unwell, and the blade slipped. The blood beaded up on her palm, 3 dark drops on pale skin, and inside her skull, with the suddenness of a door being kicked open, she heard a voice that was not hers. Burn this kingdom to the ground before I let him touch her. It was Halvar. It was a thought she had not been meant to hear. It was 3 days old. She stood very still in the kitchen. It runs both ways. It runs both ways when she bleeds. And as she stood there, apple half-peeled, blood on her hand, a king's old thought ringing in her head, she heard a second voice, older, drier, pale. If she survives the next council, she becomes a problem. We will move on her at the vote. Drovan. Drovan, thinking inside Halvar's head, which meant Halvar was bleeding. Halvar was bleeding somewhere in this fortress right now. She dropped the knife. She ran. She found him in the council chamber on the 3rd floor. Drovan was standing over him with a thin blade in one hand and a silver chain of his office in the other, and Halvar was on one knee on the stone floor with a cut across his ribs and another across his forearm, and the chain of office had been looped, twice, around the king's throat. It was not an assassination. It was a binding renewal. Drovan had been performing this ritual once a year since Halvar was crowned, and Halvar had never remembered it afterward, because the ritual erased the memory of itself. That was how it had survived. But this year, Wren had bled in the kitchen. This year, the binding had run both ways. This year, Wren came through the door. Drovan turned. The chain of office was glowing, a soft, cold silver, and the script woven into its links was old, and Wren had seen the equal of it in the ledger, and she understood, in the half-second between the door swinging open and Drovan's mouth opening to call for the guard, that this chain was the artifact in which her own binding lived. Drovan said, very calmly, "Captain." Behind Wren, a man stepped out of the shadow of the corridor, Captain Asger, broad and silent, Mirella's enforcer who had not departed with her, and his hand closed around Wren's arm. She did not fight him. She looked at Halvar. She thought, very clearly, hold on. Halvar's eyes lifted. His mouth moved. He did not have breath for words. He thought back. I am. Asger dragged her from the chamber. The door slammed shut behind her. The last thing she heard through the binding before the corridor swallowed her was Drovan's voice, calm, almost gentle, saying, Now then, Your Grace, where were we? She was put in a cell in the cellar. There was no window. There was no light. There was only the slow drip of water somewhere overhead and the silver script of the binding humming in her skull. And somewhere above her in the fortress, a man was being slowly bled into a chain that had owned him since he was 25 years old. And she had no weapon, and no key, and no allies. And Roderick was dead, and Mirella was gone, and the council was Droven's, and the guard was Asger's. She was alone. She was as alone as she had ever been, and she had been alone often in her 22 years, and she sat in the dark with her back against the stone and her hands on her knees and counted. 1, 2, 3. The way she had counted every winter of her life. Then she stopped counting. She thought, very deliberately, at the king of the Iron Reach. I am still here. It went out across the dark, a long silence. Then, faint, exhausted, but there. I am still here too. She closed her eyes. She said, aloud, to the empty cell. Then we are not done. If you are still listening, and I am grateful, please leave a comment when you reach the end and tell me where in the world you are sitting with this story tonight. It helps the algorithm find more listeners like you, and it helps me find you. Old Linnea opened the cell door at the 3rd hour past midnight. She did not speak. She handed Wren a key, a small iron file, and a folded cloth that contained, Wren understood at once, a piece of the chain. A single link, pale silver, glowing faintly with the same script Wren had seen in the council chamber. How? Wren whispered. I have been waiting 40 years for a Luna who could hear him back, the old healer said. I do not have many years left. I would like to live to see it. She turned and walked back up the stairs into the dark. Wren stood for a moment, with the link in her palm. Then she ran. She came up out of the cellar, through the kitchen, through the great hall, and up the spiral stair to the council chamber. And as she ran, the silver script began to burn. Long, pale lines threading up her forearms, across her collarbone, around her throat. As though the chain itself had recognized that a piece of it was missing and was trying to drag her back. She did not stop. She reached the council chamber door. She kicked it open. Halvar was on the floor. The chain was around his throat. Drovan stood above him with the thin blade poised over a fresh cut on the king's chest, and the silver script of the binding artifact had brightened to a hard, cold white. Drovan turned. He saw Wren in the doorway, with the silver burning visibly across her skin, and her hand closed around a single missing link. And for the first time in 50 years of service to the Iron Throne, the High Steward's face showed fear. Child, my name, Wren said quietly, is Wren of the Southern Hold. She walked into the room. The silver burned hotter. She felt it carve into her throat. A fine, hot line, deep enough that she would carry the scar. But she did not stop. I am 22 years old. I am the offering you tried to remove. I am the woman whose name you wrote in your ledger, with a blank space waiting beside it. She lifted the link. And I am the one who took this from your chain. Drovan lunged for her. She slammed the link onto the stone of the council table and brought the iron file down across it once, hard, and the link broke. The chain around Halvar's throat let go. The script on Wren's skin went out. Drovan dropped to his knees, and the silver chain of his office fell from his hands and lay on the stone like something dead, and the pale binding script along its length flickered once, and faded, and did not return. Halvar pushed himself up from the floor with one hand. He crossed the room and caught Wren before her knees folded. She had not realized her knees were folding. And he held her at arm's length and looked at her with the silver still faintly visible along her throat, and he said, How? She heard you, Wren said, when I bled. The binding ran both ways. I heard what he was about to do. And the link. Linnea. He closed his eyes for one breath. Then he turned, still holding her up, and he looked at the man kneeling on his council chamber floor, and he said, High Steward Drovan, by the right of the Iron Throne and the witness of my house, you are stripped of your office, your name, and your protection. Your ledger will be read aloud in the great hall before the moon turns. Every lunar candidate you removed will be named. Every wolf who served you knowingly will be exiled. The chain of your office will be melted, and the silver returned to the holds you stole from." Droven did not look up. "And the door," Halvar said. "The locked door in her corridor. We will open it tomorrow. Together. In daylight. With witnesses." He looked down at Ren. He said, only to her, "Can you stand?" "Yes." "Will you stand beside me when I read the ledger to my pack?" "Yes." "Will you be my Luna?" She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Ask me again when the silver fades from my throat." He smiled. He had not smiled in 9 months. "Yes," he said, "I will." The kiss came an hour later, in the corridor outside the council chamber, after the guards had taken Droven away and Asger had been disarmed, and the hall below had begun to fill with wolves, who did not yet know what had happened, but knew that something had. Halvar lifted her hand to his lips first, then her wrist. Then he looked at her, at the silver fading from her throat in slow, pale threads, and he said her name once more, very quietly, and what passed between them then was a single moment of contact that the audience cannot describe afterward, only that something 3 years frozen in him broke open and warmed, and something 22 years guarded in her recognized, finally, that she was being chosen by a man who had already seen the inside of her head and decided to stay anyway. He stepped back. He said, "We have a kingdom to clean." "I know." "It will take years." "I know." "You are not obligated to any of it. If you walk out of this fortress in the morning, I will see you safely back to your sister, and I will not follow." "I know," she said. "That is why I am staying." The ledger was read in the great hall the next afternoon. Halvar read it himself. 40 wolves stood witness, and so did Ren, and so did old Linnea. And every name Droven had removed across 30 years was spoken aloud for the first time, including the name of Halvar's mother, who had been buried in the ledger with the same dry hand that had nearly written the same word beside Ren. 3 council members were exiled by sundown. 2 more were taken into custody. The silver chain of the High Steward's office was melted in the great hearth in front of the entire pack, and the pale binding script burned green in the flames for a long moment before it went out. The northern hold sent an apology for Lady Morella's conduct. The southern hold sent a wagon with Ren's sister Bryn in it, 12 years old, and clutching a wooden hare carved by a mother neither of them remembered. And Ren met her at the gate and did not let go of her for an hour. The locked door at the end of the corridor was opened the next morning. Behind it, Halvar's father's true papers, a second ledger, the name of every wolf Droven had ever ordered killed, the truth of what had happened to Halvar's mother, the truth of how the binding had been forged, and by whom, and when, and at what cost. Halvar read it all. Ren read it beside him. When they were done, he said, "It is worse than I knew." "Yes." "We will name every one of them." "Yes." She took his hand. He did not flinch. 3 months later, the gardens of the Iron Reach were thawing for the first time in 3 winters. The frost that had held the inner courtyard since Halvar's coronation had begun to retreat the morning after the chain was broken, and by the 2nd month, the old apple tree at the foot of the north tower had put out a single, stubborn blossom. By the 3rd month, there were a dozen. Halvar was crowned again, properly this time, with witnesses he had chosen himself, on a morning so cold the breath of the assembled pack made a single white cloud above them. Ren was crowned beside him. Old Linnea placed the circlet on her head with hands that shook only a little. The carved wolf throne behind them had been reset, and beside it a second seat had been added, smaller, simpler, of cedar instead of iron. It was Ren's. She had asked for cedar because it smelled like the southern hold she had been taken from, and Halvar had ordered it the same afternoon. Bryn lived in the chamber that had once held Halvar's mother's papers. She had the wooden hare on her pillow. She had a beater who had volunteered to teach her to ride. She had grown half an inch in 3 months. A letter arrived from the Southern Hold steward, the man who had beaten Wren bloody in the snow. It was grovelling. It was extensive. It contained a great many apologies and a very expensive offering of furs. Wren read it once. She wrote 3 words at the bottom and sent it back. I remember everything. She did not need to write more. On the last evening of that 3rd month, Halvar found her in the inner courtyard at the foot of the apple tree. She was watching the blossoms. He stood 3 paces from her, the way he had learned to stand from the very first night, and he said, "The silver is gone from your throat." "I know." He waited. She turned to him. "Ask me again," she said. He asked her. She said yes. And inside his head, inside the bond that no longer needed a curse to hold it, that had simply become the way 2 people who had survived something together would always speak to each other, in the quiet behind their words, she thought, very clearly, "You said my name like it cost you." Once, 6 months ago, in a corridor in the dark. I have not stopped hearing it since. He thought back, without effort. Good. Don't. The apple tree dropped a single white petal onto the snow between them. If you stayed with me through all of this, through the courtyard and the cell and the chain and the corridor in the dark, thank you. Truly. Tell me in the comments where in the world you are listening from tonight, what part of this story made you hold your breath, and whether you would like to come back next week for another. Subscribe if you have not yet. There is always another wolf waiting at the gate. Sleep well.